I've donated more to charity this year than you've made in your entire career, Blake Lively said confidently to MrBeast. The numbers MrBeast revealed next left her speechless. This is the incredible story of how the world's most generous content creator completely humiliated Hollywood's biggest star, and why what happened that night changed how the entire entertainment industry thinks about real philanthropy. It was the evening of October 22nd at the Global Charity Leadership Summit in Beverly Hills. The most influential philanthropists, celebrities and business leaders had gathered at the prestigious Beverly Hilton for what was being called the event that would define modern charitable giving. Oprah Winfrey was there. Bill Gates had flown in from Seattle. Warren Buffett sat in the front row next to George Soros. But the real attention was focused on two very different types of celebrities who represented completely opposite approaches to giving. Blake Lively, the Hollywood actress who had built her reputation on glamorous red carpets, designer gowns, and what she called sophisticated philanthropy. She had been featured on the cover of Vanity Fair's New Philanthropists issue just 3 months earlier. Her charity work was always photographed by the best photographers, covered by the most prestigious magazines, and attended by the most powerful people in entertainment. And then there was Jimmy Donaldson, better known as MrBeast, the 25-year-old YouTuber, who had somehow become the most talked-about philanthropist of his generation. His approach was completely different: raw, unfiltered, direct, no red carpets, no designer suits, just massive amounts of money, going directly to people who needed it most. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Blake Lively represented old money elegance, traditional charity galas, and what Hollywood considered proper philanthropy. MrBeast represented something entirely new: internet-native giving, and what many older philanthropists saw as publicity stunts. The tension had been building for months. Hollywood's charity establishment had been watching MrBeast's rise with growing concern. This unknown YouTuber was raising more money in a single video than many established charity organizations raised in an entire year. His random acts of kindness videos were getting hundreds of millions of views, while traditional charity events struggled to get media coverage. Blake Lively had become the unofficial spokesperson for Hollywood's criticism of MrBeast's methods. In interviews, she had subtly suggested that real philanthropy required more than just throwing money at cameras. She believed in what she called sustainable, thoughtful giving, through established foundations and carefully vetted organizations. But tonight was different. Tonight they would be sharing the same stage for the first time. The panel discussion was titled, "The Future of Philanthropic Leadership," and everyone in the room knew this wasn't going to be a typical charity event. This was going to be a clash between two completely different philosophies of giving. The moderator was Anderson Cooper, a veteran journalist who understood the significance of having these two figures together. He had covered both traditional charity events and MrBeast's viral giving campaigns. He knew the underlying tension that existed between Hollywood's established philanthropy community and the new wave of internet-driven charitable giving. As the evening began, Blake Lively looked absolutely stunning. She wore a custom Valentino gown that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Her jewelry was borrowed from Cartier. Her hair and makeup had been done by the same team that worked with A-list celebrities at the Met Gala. She represented everything that Hollywood charity events were supposed to be: elegant, sophisticated, and expensive. MrBeast, by contrast, wore a simple black hoodie and jeans. No designer labels, no expensive accessories, no styling team. He looked exactly like what he was, a young man who had built an empire by focusing on results rather than appearances. The difference in their presentations was so dramatic that several people in the audience actually laughed when they saw them sitting next to each other. The panel started with the usual questions about philanthropic philosophy and the importance of giving back. Blake Lively answered with her typical polished responses about strategic philanthropy and building sustainable change through established institutions. She spoke eloquently about her work with various foundations, her support for women's rights organizations, and her belief that charity should be dignified and respectful. MrBeast's answers were characteristically direct. He talked about seeing problems and solving them immediately. No committees, no lengthy approval processes, no administrative overhead, just direct action that got results. He spoke about building wells in Africa, giving away houses to homeless families, and providing food to food banks, all documented and shared so that others could see the impact of their donations. For the first 30 minutes, the conversation remained polite and professional. Both participants stayed in their lanes, discussing their different approaches without directly criticizing each other. The audience was engaged but not particularly surprised by anything they were hearing. Then Anderson Cooper asked the question that would change everything. There's been some debate in philanthropic circles about the role of publicity in charitable giving. Blake, what's your perspective on the relationship between media coverage and effective philanthropy? Blake Lively's eyes lit up. This was the opening she had been waiting for, the moment she had been preparing for. She was about to put this young YouTuber in his place, in front of the most important philanthropic audience in the world. Blake Lively shifted in her chair and smiled, the kind of condescending smile that Hollywood actresses had perfected over decades of dealing with people they considered beneath them. Anderson, that's such an important question, she began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed she was about to deliver a masterclass in proper philanthropy. I think we need to be very careful about the difference between authentic charitable work and what I can only call performative giving. She paused, making sure everyone in the room was paying attention, making sure the cameras were focused on her. Real philanthropy, meaningful philanthropy, doesn't need cameras and clickbait headlines. It doesn't need to be turned into entertainment. When I work with Save the Children or when I support Planned Parenthood, I'm not doing it for YouTube views or Instagram likes. I'm doing it because I genuinely care about making a difference. The room was completely silent. Everyone could feel the tension building. Blake was clearly targeting MrBeast without saying his name directly, but everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. I've been fortunate enough to work with some of the most respected charitable organizations in the world, she continued, her voice getting stronger and more confident. Organizations that have been making real change for decades, organizations that understand the complexity of social problems and the importance of sustainable solutions. She turned slightly in her chair, making it clear that her next comments were directed specifically at MrBeast. I have to be honest, I find it deeply troubling when I see charity being turned into content creation, when I see vulnerable people being used as props for viral videos, when I see complex social issues being reduced to simple gestures that look good on camera but don't address root causes. The audience was riveted. This wasn't just a philosophical disagreement anymore. This was a direct attack. Blake Lively was systematically dismantling MrBeast's entire approach to philanthropy, in front of 500 of the most influential people in charitable giving. And let's talk about scale, she said, her voice now dripping with condescension. Real philanthropic impact requires sustained commitment over years, decades, even. It requires working with established institutions that have the expertise and infrastructure to create lasting change. It's not about throwing money around in flashy gestures that generate headlines. Blake leaned forward, clearly building toward her knockout punch. I don't mean to be harsh, but when I look at internet philanthropy, I see a lot of ego disguised as altruism. I see people who are more interested in building their personal brand than actually helping people. I see charity being commodified for entertainment value. She paused for dramatic effect, savoring the moment. The room was dead silent. Every person in the audience was holding their breath, waiting to see how MrBeast would respond to this systematic destruction of his reputation. Then Blake delivered what she thought would be the final blow. To put this in perspective, she said, looking directly at MrBeast with a smile that was both condescending and cruel, I've donated more to charity this year than you've made in your entire career. The difference is, I don't need to film it for content. The room erupted in whispers. The claim was so bold, so dismissive, so absolutely devastating, that several people actually gasped audibly. Blake Lively had just claimed that her annual charitable giving exceeded MrBeast's entire lifetime earnings, in front of 500 witnesses, with cameras rolling. Anderson Cooper looked stunned. He had moderated thousands of interviews and panel discussions, but he had never seen such a direct and brutal attack delivered with such elegant cruelty. Blake sat back in her chair, clearly satisfied with herself. She had just destroyed the credibility of internet philanthropy's biggest star. In front of the most important charitable audience in the world, she had demonstrated the difference between Hollywood sophistication and internet amateurism. She had put this young YouTuber in his place, once and for all. The camera panned to MrBeast, who was sitting perfectly still, his expression completely unreadable. He wasn't angry, he wasn't offensive, he wasn't even surprised. He just sat there, looking at Blake Lively, with what could only be described as curiosity. Anderson Cooper cleared his throat nervously. "Jimmy, would you like to respond to those comments?" For a moment, MrBeast said nothing. He just continued looking at Blake Lively, as if he was trying to figure out whether she was serious or if this was some kind of elaborate joke. Then, slowly, he began to smile, not a cruel smile, not an angry smile, just an amused smile, the smile of someone who was about to reveal information that would change everything. "Blake," he said quietly, his voice so calm it was almost conversational, "I think you might want to check your math." Blake's confident expression faltered slightly. "Excuse me?" MrBeast's smile grew wider. "You said you've donated more to charity this year than I've made in my entire career." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'm just wondering where you got those numbers." What happened next would be replayed on every social media platform, entertainment news show, and philanthropy blog for months to come. MrBeast reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out what looked like a simple smartphone. But this wasn't just any phone. This was about to become the weapon that would destroy Blake Lively's credibility forever. "Blake, since you brought up numbers," MrBeast said, holding up his phone for everyone to see, "let me share some actual data with you." His voice was still calm, still conversational, but there was something different about his tone now, something that suggested Blake Lively had just made the biggest mistake of her life. "This phone contains the financial records for all of my philanthropic activities over the past 5 years. Every dollar donated, every project funded, every person helped, all documented, all verified, all publicly available." He looked directly at Blake. "Would you like to see what real philanthropic impact looks like?" Blake's face went pale. She was starting to realize that she might have seriously underestimated the young man sitting next to her, but it was too late to back down now. Not in front of 500 witnesses, not with cameras rolling. "Let's start with this year," MrBeast continued, his voice getting stronger, more confident. "Since you mentioned your annual charitable giving," he looked down at his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be an extensive list of donations and projects. "In January, I funded the construction of 100 wells in Kenya, providing clean water to over 50,000 people. Cost $2.3 million. The room was completely silent. "In February, I gave away 100 houses to homeless families across 12 cities. Cost $8.7 million. Blake Lively was starting to look seriously uncomfortable. These numbers were far larger than anything she had expected, but MrBeast was just getting started. "In March, I funded eye surgery for 1,000 blind people in developing countries. Cost $1.8 million. "In April, I planted 20 million trees as part of the Teen Trees initiative. Cost $4.2 million. The audience was starting to murmur in amazement. These weren't just impressive numbers, these were numbers that represented massive real-world impact. But MrBeast wasn't finished. "In May, I opened 12 food banks in food desert communities, providing meals for over 200,000 families. Cost $6.4 million. "In June, I funded full college scholarships for 500 underprivileged students. Cost $15.2 million. Blake was now visibly sweating. Her confident smile had completely disappeared. She was beginning to understand that she had challenged someone whose charitable giving dwarfed anything she had ever imagined. "Should I continue?" MrBeast asked, looking directly at Blake with genuine curiosity. "Because we're only halfway through the year, and we're already at $38.6 million, and that's just the major projects. That doesn't include the smaller donations, the emergency relief funds, the individual families I've helped, or the ongoing operational costs of the various foundations I support." The room was absolutely silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the occasional camera click. 500 of the most influential people in philanthropy were listening to a 25-year-old YouTuber casually discuss charitable giving that exceeded the annual budgets of most major nonprofit organizations. "But Blake," MrBeast continued, his voice taking on an almost educational tone, "you said, you've donated more than I've made in my entire career, so let's talk about my career earnings.
Since you seem to have done your research. He scrolled to a different section of his phone. My YouTube channel generates approximately $15 million per month in revenue. That's $180 million per year. Over the past 5 years, that's approximately $900 million in total earnings. Blake's mouth fell open. She was starting to realize the magnitude of her mistake. But here's the thing, Blake, MrBeast said, his voice still calm, but now carrying the weight of absolute authority. I don't keep that money. Approximately 85% of everything I earn goes directly back into content creation and charitable giving, because unlike traditional entertainment, my business model is built on giving money away. He looked directly at Anderson Cooper, then back at Blake. So when you say you've donated more to charity this year than I've made in my entire career, you're claiming that you've personally given away more than $900 million. The implications of what MrBeast was saying were staggering. Blake Lively would have had to donate nearly $1 billion to charity in a single year to back up her claim. Everyone in the room knew that was impossible. Blake, MrBeast said gently, almost kindly, what exactly did you donate this year? Blake Lively sat frozen in her chair, her mind racing as she tried to figure out how to respond to a question that had no good answer. She had just been exposed as having made a completely false claim, in front of the most important philanthropic audience in the world, with cameras capturing every moment of her humiliation. MrBeast waited patiently for her response. He wasn't gloating, he wasn't being cruel. He was simply giving her the opportunity to explain how she had arrived at such a wildly inaccurate statement. I support many organizations, Blake stammered, her usual composure completely shattered. Save the Children, Planned Parenthood, various women's rights groups. Her voice was getting quieter and less confident with each word. That's wonderful, MrBeast said genuinely. Those are all important causes. But Blake, how much did you actually donate? Because you made a very specific claim about exceeding my lifetime earnings.
The room was completely silent. Everyone was waiting to hear Blake Lively's response. Everyone was waiting to see if she could somehow justify her earlier statement. Blake looked around the room, searching for support, for understanding, for any way out of the hole she had dug for herself. But she found only curious stares and uncomfortable silence. My total charitable giving this year was, she paused, clearly struggling with whether to tell the truth or try to maintain her false claim, approximately $2.8 million. The number hung in the air like a confession, $2.8 million. It was a respectable amount by normal standards. It was more than most people would donate in their entire lifetimes. But it was also a tiny fraction of what MrBeast had given away in just the first 6 months of the year. MrBeast nodded thoughtfully. $2.8 million is a significant contribution, Blake. You should be proud of that. But, he paused, letting the mathematics of the situation become clear to everyone in the room. That's about 7% of what I donated just in the month of June. The brutal simplicity of the comparison was devastating. Blake Lively's entire annual charitable giving was less than what MrBeast had donated in a single month. Her claim about exceeding his lifetime earnings wasn't just wrong, it was off by a factor of more than 300. But MrBeast wasn't finished. Blake, you mentioned that real philanthropy doesn't need cameras and clickbait headlines. You said you find it troubling when charity is turned into content creation. I want to address that directly. He stood up from his chair, still holding his phone, his demeanor shifting from defensive to educational. You're absolutely right that some people use charity for personal promotion. That's a real problem in philanthropy. But here's what I think you're missing about what I do. MrBeast began walking across the stage, his confidence growing with every step. Every video I make, every charitable project I document, serves 3 purposes. First, it raises awareness about the specific issue I'm addressing. Second, it encourages other people to get involved in charitable giving. And third, it generates revenue that allows me to fund even larger projects. He turned to face the audience, speaking directly to the 500 philanthropic leaders who were hanging on his every word. Let me give you some concrete examples of how documentation creates impact. When I made a video about homelessness, showing myself giving away houses to homeless families, that video was watched by over 200 million people. 200 million people learned about the housing crisis in America. More importantly, viewers donated an additional $43 million to homeless organizations in the month after that video was published. The audience was starting to understand something they had never considered before. MrBeast's documentation of his charitable work wasn't just publicity, it was a fundraising mechanism that amplified his impact far beyond his personal donations. When I made a video about global hunger, showing myself funding food banks and community kitchens, viewers donated $67 million to hunger relief organizations worldwide. My personal contribution was $8 million, but the video generated 8 times that amount in additional donations. MrBeast walked back toward Blake, his tone becoming more pointed. So when you criticize my methods, when you call my work performative giving, you're not just attacking me, you're attacking a system that has generated over $500 million in charitable donations from people who were inspired by seeing direct action. He sat back down, looking directly at Blake. Blake, you donated $2.8 million this year. That's admirable, but my videos inspired other people to donate $500 million. So I have to ask, which approach is more effective? The question hung in the air like a final judgment. Blake had no answer because there was no answer. The mathematics were undeniable. MrBeast's documented charitable work had generated exponentially more charitable giving than traditional Hollywood philanthropy. But MrBeast still wasn't finished with his systematic dismantling of Blake's credibility. You mentioned working with established institutions and the importance of sustainable solutions. Let me tell you about some of my partnerships with established organizations. He pulled up another section on his phone. I work directly with Feeding America, the largest hunger relief organization in the United States. I've funded their operations in 47 states. I work with Charity Water, the most effective clean water organization in the world. I've funded their projects in 23 countries. I work with the World Health Organization on vision restoration programs. I work with Habitat for Humanity on housing construction. I work with local food banks, homeless shelters, and community organizations in hundreds of cities around the world. MrBeast's voice was getting stronger, more passionate. The difference is, I don't just write checks and attend galas. I get personally involved in every project. I visit every location. I meet every person we're helping. I document everything to ensure transparency and accountability. He looked directly at Blake, his tone becoming almost philosophical. Blake, you represent everything that's wrong with traditional philanthropy. You give money to feel good about yourself. You attend charity events to be seen with other wealthy people. You use your charitable work to enhance your personal brand and social status. The criticism was surgical in its precision. I give money to solve problems. I document my work to inspire others and raise additional funds. I use my platform to create systemic change that extends far beyond my personal contributions. MrBeast stood up again, addressing the entire audience. Everyone in this room tonight has a choice. You can continue supporting the old model of philanthropy, where wealthy people write tax-deductible checks, attend expensive galas, and feel good about themselves while problems persist. Or you can embrace a new model, where charitable work is documented, impact is measured, transparency is required, and results matter more than appearances. MrBeast walked to the center of the stage, commanding the attention of every person in the room. Blake asked about scale and sustainable impact. Let me share some numbers that will help put things in perspective. He looked down at his phone one more time, then back at the audience. In the past 5 years, my documented charitable work has directly helped over 10 million people. 10 million people who now have clean water, food, housing, medical care, or educational opportunities that they didn't have before. The number was staggering. 10 million people, more than the population of most countries. But here's the really important number. MrBeast continued. My videos have been watched by over 15 billion people worldwide. 15 billion views that have educated people about global poverty, hunger, homelessness, and other critical issues, views that have inspired millions of people to get involved in charitable work for the first time in their lives. He paused, letting those numbers sink in. Blake, in your entire career, how many people have you directly helped through your charitable work? How many people have you inspired to become philanthropists themselves? Blake didn't answer. She couldn't answer. The contrast was too dramatic, too overwhelming, too devastating. And here's what I find most interesting about tonight's conversation, MrBeast said, his voice taking on a tone of genuine curiosity. Blake, you criticized my methods, called my work performative, claimed I was more interested in building my brand than helping people. He walked closer to her chair. But you came to this event wearing a dress that costs more than most people make in a year. You're wearing jewelry worth more than I've donated to some entire communities. You arrived in a limousine that probably cost more per hour than many families spend on food in a month. The comparison was brutal but undeniable. So I have to ask, who's really using charity for personal branding? The person who documents giving away millions of dollars, or the person who shows up to charity events wearing hundreds of thousands of dollars in designer clothing? MrBeast sat back down, his tone becoming almost conversational. Blake, I think the real difference between us isn't about methods or philosophy. It's about priorities. You prioritize appearance. I prioritize results. You care about being seen as philanthropic. I care about actually solving problems. You want to be photographed at charity events. I want to eliminate the need for charity events. He looked directly at her, his voice calm but absolutely devastating. And most importantly, you made a claim tonight that was factually false. You said you've donated more to charity this year than I've made in my entire career. That statement was off by approximately $897 million. The room erupted in applause. Not polite charity gala applause, but genuine, enthusiastic approval from people who had just witnessed one of the most complete intellectual destructions in philanthropic history. MrBeast raised his hand, asking for quiet. I want to be clear about something. I'm not attacking Blake personally. I'm challenging a system that has allowed philanthropic theater to replace philanthropic results. I'm challenging an approach that prioritizes donor recognition over recipient assistance. Blake represents a type of philanthropy that makes donors feel good without necessarily making recipients better off. It's charity that's more about the giver than the receiver. It's philanthropy that's designed to enhance social status rather than solve social problems. He stood up one final time, addressing the entire audience. Everyone in this room has the power to change how philanthropy works. You can continue supporting organizations that spend 60% of their budget on administrative costs and donor recognition events, or you can start demanding transparency, measurable results, and direct impact. You can continue writing checks and attending galas, or you can get personally involved in the problems you claim to care about. You can continue using charity to enhance your social standing, or you can use your resources to actually change people's lives. MrBeast sat back down, looking directly at Blake one final time. Blake, I hope tonight has been educational for you. I hope you've learned the difference between philanthropic performance and philanthropic impact. And I hope, going forward, you'll focus more on helping people and less on being seen helping people. The silence that followed was profound. Blake Lively, the woman who had confidently walked onto that stage planning to humiliate a young YouTuber, sat frozen in her chair, completely destroyed by facts, numbers, and her own false claims. Anderson Cooper, clearly sensing that the panel had reached its natural conclusion, tried to move to closing remarks, but everyone in the room knew what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just a disagreement about philanthropic methods. This was a complete paradigm shift in how people think about charitable giving. In less than 40 minutes, MrBeast had dismantled the entire foundation of traditional Hollywood philanthropy, exposed the hypocrisy of performative giving, and demonstrated why results matter more than appearances. The audience knew they had witnessed something historic. As the panel ended, and both participants left the stage, the philanthropic world was already buzzing with reactions. People were pulling out their phones, checking MrBeast's claimed donation numbers,
researching his charitable projects, and confirming that everything he had said was verifiably true. The numbers were devastating for Blake's credibility. MrBeast had indeed donated over $60 million in the first 6 months of the year. His lifetime earnings were indeed close to $900 million. His videos had indeed generated hundreds of millions of additional charitable donations from inspired viewers. Within hours, clips of the confrontation were trending on every social media platform. The hashtag #CharityFacts became viral, with millions of people sharing the actual numbers behind MrBeast's philanthropic work. Blake Lively's false claim about exceeding his lifetime earnings became a meme, but not in a way that favored her reputation. Philanthropic organizations began reaching out to MrBeast, requesting partnerships and collaboration. Traditional charity gala attendance dropped dramatically as donors started questioning whether their money was actually helping people, or just funding expensive events. The entire philanthropic landscape began shifting toward transparency, documentation, and measurable results. Blake Lively's representatives tried to control the damage, issuing statements about her commitment to charitable work and her respect for all philanthropic approaches, but the mathematics of the situation made any defense impossible. She had made a factual claim that was demonstrably false, in front of witnesses, with cameras rolling. The entertainment industry's relationship with philanthropy changed overnight. Celebrities began questioning whether traditional charity galas were actually effective, or whether they were just expensive social events disguised as charitable work. Many started adopting MrBeast's model of documented, direct impact giving. But perhaps the most significant impact was on young people around the world who had watched the confrontation. Millions of teenagers and young adults saw that philanthropy didn't have to be boring, bureaucratic, or inefficient. They saw that charitable work could be transparent, exciting, and incredibly effective. MrBeast had proven something that the traditional philanthropic establishment had always denied. Documentation doesn't diminish charitable impact, it amplifies it. Transparency doesn't reduce the dignity of giving, it increases accountability. Entertainment value doesn't corrupt charitable work, it inspires more people to get involved. Blake Lively had walked into that charity summit, thinking she could embarrass a young YouTuber by exposing him as a fake philanthropist. Instead, she had accidentally given him the perfect platform to demonstrate exactly why traditional Hollywood charity was becoming obsolete. The lesson was clear, and it resonated far beyond Beverly Hills. When you challenge someone to prove their charitable impact, you'd better make sure your own numbers can withstand scrutiny. When you criticize someone's methods, you'd better make sure your results are superior. MrBeast had destroyed Blake Lively's credibility, not with personal attacks or cruel insults, but with facts, documentation, and the kind of transparency that traditional philanthropy had always avoided. He had shown the difference between giving for recognition and giving for results. Most importantly, he had demonstrated that the future of philanthropy belongs to people who care more about solving problems than attending parties, people who measure success by lives changed rather than photos published, people who understand that real charitable impact requires real commitment, not just real diamonds. The confrontation between Blake Lively and MrBeast didn't just expose one person's false claims, it exposed an entire system of philanthropic theater that had prioritized donor comfort over recipient assistance for decades, and in doing so, it accelerated a revolution in charitable giving that was already underway. Sometimes the most powerful response to elitist dismissal is simply showing your work. Sometimes the best way to defend your methods is by demonstrating your results. And sometimes, the most devastating weapon against philanthropic hypocrisy is just the truth.
Blake Lively learned the hard way that you should never challenge someone without checking your facts first. Want to see more moments where arrogant celebrities get completely humiliated by the truth? Subscribe right now, because we find the most incredible confrontations, where humble people destroy entitled elites. Every single day,